Welcome to DXgov governance discussion for Wednesday, April 27th. Happy King's Day. Starting first with the proposal roundup, or here's the agenda for today. And then, starting first with the proposal roundup. No proposals on mainnet or Arbitrum, but a good chunk of proposals on Gnosis chain. A couple different contributor proposals, lots of new swapper contributors. So I wanted to maybe just highlight a couple there. This is Diego Ferreira, who I believe, was connected at Dallas and LizCon. And then there is Leonardo Bertiotti, who has been helping out with the new Swapbox implementation on Swapper. And has been involved there. And then I think this is still pre-boosted, but there's also Jorge Lopez, who is also helping out on Swapper there. I believe he was helping out with some of the eco router there. So these are a couple new developers. Big thanks to like the Venki and Zet, who have been kind of trying to bring them into their layer, kind of lure them in, and also for Melanie for kind of helping them onboard here and start the process there. So we have those, a couple different rep boosts for Sarah and also for the Thriller. The Thriller has been involved on a couple of different community calls also there. And then there are a couple different worker proposals for existing contributors. Katie Fork's proposal here for the second half of its February-March 2022 one, and also the DX Amsterdam stipend. So make sure for those of them gone to Amsterdam that you're claiming the stipend there. The conditions are laid out there. Oh, they can't see the screen share. What about now?
I see a black screen.
Well, me too. Weird. Jitsy's always keeping you on your toes. I see a big Chris. Oh, you still see me? That's the big problem. I thought that when you share your screen, at least I wasn't going to be.
Unfortunately, it's gone now, but I did see a big Chris for a minute.
And how did that make you feel, Keenan? What about now?
He's back. Big Chris is back.
Really? So you can't see my screen here? That at any time my screen and myself is visible by someone in particular, and I'll have to make sure I'm smiling. I did dress up today, if you notice. I was just thinking that when I put on a shirt today. I think it's like the first time I've worn a collared shirt in a long time, and just made me feel good, kind of. Anyway, back to the proposal roundup. So there's Katie Forks. There's also Ross Nielsen's, who also always has it's always a great read, going over different things that he worked on and also things for DXgov. And then, there's three different buyback orders, 183, 184, and 185. And that is, I believe, all of the current live proposals on Gnosis chain there. So, any questions, comments on the live proposals? Cool. And then, moving on to discussion items. Just first and foremost, I think an Amsterdam debrief. I know people have done these in all the other calls, so we don't really have to talk about much here. But I thought it was a great opportunity to see everyone. Lots of cool things going on in terms of projects people working on, the hackathon, lots of different conferences and events. So some cool things with governance going on. I think as we've gone to the different conferences, it's increasingly obvious that more and more projects are kind of making that their focus and how they're presenting their ideas. So I don't know if anyone wanted to ask any questions or any comments on Amsterdam. I guess we now still have Adam, Dave, and John, and maybe Zet, I think, are still on the ground there dealing with King's Day there. But it's been a good, good experience, I think, for all.
Yeah, Amsterdam has been great. Any thoughts from your presentation, Chris, at the Dallas? Actually was not there for that, but
Yeah, I guess so for the first the GGG Global Governance Gathering was probably the most intense like governance component there. So there's lots of the different DAOs involved there. So yeah, this was I did a presentation on Dao Sovereignty. I will post the slides in the in DAO Talk. This had been an article I had done previously, and it's kind of trying to encapsulate this idea of DXDAO, of ownership by DAOs, and like what that means, and how can DAOs be sovereign, like we think of individuals being sovereign, or sovereign like countries themselves are sovereign. And so I kind of like looked at all of those things there. Yeah, and so I think maybe is a word I'm trying to use a little bit more. Maybe we can all use a little bit more, as this idea of sovereignty really captures a lot of things that DAOs are trying to build, like a different system and a different way of operating that is, independent, you could say, of other systems. But I think sovereign is a word that I like a little bit more.
I like the word as well. And I do think that's something that we should be striving for, right? To do and design things that will make DXDAO like more sovereign. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and then it's just funny to hear it. I mean, it's partly because with the whole Ukraine, with the Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and kind of hearing it in that sense there, and it makes you think about it a lot there. So yeah, any other Amsterdam thoughts, governance related? Or Melanie also was speaking on a panel at I think it was at the GGG about Contributor X and kind of those types of things. So that was another good experience to kind of share ideas. And I believe there may be an article coming out with that, maybe even a Twitter thread. There we go. Oh, that's from Nathan posting it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I also, like Chris mentioned, I did a panel discussion workshop with a few other people ops, kind of leaders in the space, members of Gitcoin, MakerDAO, and Aragon. And we kind of were just discussing the importance of building healthy teams within your DAO as we kind of like scale and the space kind of evolves. So in the upcoming days, I think I'm going to be putting out an article and then, a Twitter thread on what that panel discussion was about, and then hopefully more of these talks to come in the future at future conferences. And really love being able to talk about the contributor experience and kind of share my thoughts with the greater community.
Awesome. And then like another more governance, there was I thought one of my favorite discussions was between Sky and Chris, was his name, from Yearn. It was actually at the Live Peer Summit. I don't think there's a recording of it, but it was kind of as Melanie's talking about, like actually people working in DAOs trying to figure out these things, and actually two people that have a lot of experience with that. So I thought that was a really good one. And Keenan, I did think he would be a great person, Chris from Yearn, to have on Operation Spaces when we kind of think about that there.
Oh, I need to find Sky to tell him, but I didn't have a chance to catch Sky's talk at Live Peer, but someone reached out to me and said that she felt so inspired from Sky's talk about, and when he mentioned the contributor experience at DXDAO, that she had to reach out to me and figure out what I was doing for DXDAO, and that she would love to hear more about the processes we have in place within our DAO. So if anybody has a recording of Sky's talk, I definitely need to catch it. Wayne made an audio recording.
And Yearn has like a pseudo reputation system in a lot of ways, actually. Like they call these different circles of contributors that doers or something, are at the top, and they have certain capabilities or responsibilities. So yeah, it was really interesting to hear that discussion. Especially with Yearn, who has, I think, is one of the DAOs in the space that is really trying to figure out how to create a work environment, how to create a culture that's like a DAO first, internet first culture. Yes, bicameral is, yeah. But that's the governance 2.0 is like the ability to make those like just cameral. Maybe that's it. Okay. Any other thoughts on Amsterdam? I'm sure there will be more and more stories to come out there, but. Cool. And then let's move on to the discussion items for today, or it's the next discussion item, which is on the DXD buyback program adjustments and clarification. So just as a reminder, this is a discussion basically trying to get some clarification and adjustments to the way that the buyback program has been governed. The thing that is prompting this is the supply of ETH that has been used to conduct the buyback has been coming from the buyback reserve. Well, it's actually not been coming directly from the buyback reserve, but that's where, from an accounting perspective, the ETH is coming from. And that is going to deplete at some point. And so the discussion is what to do with when that is depleted and like kind of the long-term future of the buyback program. So I think just to kind of give a brief background here of what the post says, and then some of the responses here. In my view, there are 5 issues that we need to discuss here. So first, when does the buyback reserve deplete, and what happens to the DXD that's been purchased? 2, after the buyback reserve is depleted, what support should the general treasury give to DXD? 3, what about DXDAO supplied liquidity? 4, an updated calculation for the NAV of the treasury. And then 5, a long-term reason to hold DXD. Now, I think we can group these 5 issues into 2 buckets. The first 2 are ones that I think we can find consensus and clarification in the next week or 2 here, and actually put that clarification and adjustments in the next buyback proposal extension. And then 3, 4, and 5 are a little bit more long-term oriented ones. And I think as part of this process that we're discussing here, maybe we should come to some agreement to investigate or research this further. So starting with the first 2, and again, I think these are the ones that we need to decide and reach consensus in the next week here. The first is the buyback reserve and the purchase DXD. So if we look at the buyback order sheet, and I know that no one's not seeing my screen, but I'm hoping that the people recording are seeing it there. If we look at the buyback order sheet here, we can see that there have been 13,160 DXD purchased through the buyback program, with about 2,300 ETH there. You can see that most of this has been on XDAI, and this has been there's been a little bit on mainnet here. In the buyback reserve itself, there's 2,499 ETH in there. So you can see that the total amount would actually come up on the buyback reserve number pretty soon, especially when we include the ETH that's already in the GP relayer on Gnosis chain, which I think is about 180 ETH. But for those of us that were around at the time when the buyback program was conceived, and then we kind of adjusted it and moved it there was a pretty big shift in how the buyback was thought of after the first $1 million was purchased. So if you look back in the discussion and also in the signal proposals there, the first buyback program was actually more about acquiring DXD and using it to potentially seed liquidity on Swapper, because there had been some concern about using DXD from the treasury below NAV to seed liquidity on Swapper. So part of the motivation was to acquire this DXD on the open market and then use it to seed liquidity there. So you can see in the post where we had highlighted this early discussion there on that first $1 million of DXD that was purchased. And then after that first $1 million of DXD was purchased, there was a shift in how we were thinking about the buyback program. And a lot of this actually comes from, there was a post from John about how the Treasury, a new token model for DXD, and how the Treasury can be used to support that. But that incorporation of the buyback reserve as the source of funds didn't take place until the first extension, which would have been the second $1 million purchase. So in this interpretation, then that first $1 million that was purchased in DXD actually would go to the general Treasury, where it could potentially use for seeding liquidity on Swapper or potentially anything else. Whereas then the rest of the DXD that's been purchased since then would then be from the buyback reserve. And so in this interpretation, there's really two conclusions. Would be one, that means we have about 550 ETH that's left in the buyback reserve to purchase DXD through the same structure and format that we've been using for the last year for the buyback program, so that we wouldn't have to, so the buyback reserve would have probably around 2 to 3 more months of buybacks that could go on. And then second, we would then have clear understanding of who and what the DXD should be for. So in this interpretation, with the 1,300 DXD that's been purchased, 3,500 of that DXD should remain in the general Treasury, which it could be used again for seeding liquidity on Swapper or anything else. And then 9,400 DXD that was acquired through the program, and then presumably any DXD that's acquired after this, is DXD that's been purchased using ETH from the buyback reserve, and therefore that DXD could potentially be burned. And I know Augusto is getting excited because, yes, I do think if we burned the DXD, we would interact with the bonding contract for the first time almost in a year. So that's the first point there. Maybe we can just stop and see if there's any kind of like thoughts or questions or thoughts there.
I think I understand it, but just to clarify on the spreadsheet, so looking at the circulating supply, the actual circulating supply, the 39,000, that includes, that accounts for everything, right? Like that's kind of what the current circulating supply actually is, right? 39,000.
Yeah, so this includes the DXD emissions, and so this is a bit of this is DXD that's been paid out of the Treasury, and so this includes I think there's 1,000 of that was for swapper farming, maybe a little less than that, and then 1,000 of that was for contributor vesting DXD that's already been sent out, and then 1,500 of that. These numbers are actually not correct, but then the third group is an estimate of future DXD issuance there. So this is a little bit of an estimated number, but that's the actual circulating supply.
Cool. Yeah, and I guess one goal too is whatever we end up doing, whether it's burning or not, it would be good to get CoinGecko in sync, I think, with whatever the current state of things are, because I think on CoinGecko it says
it's
48,000 as the circulating supply. Yeah.
The only thing that was good, it's nice that it says 48,000 on CoinGecko, is because we had returned the DXD from mainnet, which I think is $19.99 here, to the Treasury, and so that I think lowered the CoinGecko one there. But yes, that's I think a good thing to be worried about in terms of the circulating supply and when it's on CoinGecko. And then Ross is, so the logic of the price will increase once we burn a bunch of equivalent to the value we burn. Burning tokens, Augusto maybe has different reasons. I think there's a decreasing the supply out there could give confidence to token holders that there won't be massive future inflation, right? So if you look at the actual circulating supply right now, 39,000, that seems pretty good. But if you know that there's another 100,000 DXD in the Treasury that could be issued, and therefore you'd be diluted, that could turn off some token holders. Now, there's not been any DXD really that's come out of the Treasury, and this is actually an incredibly low admission for a project of projects that are around here. So I think just because you have the DXD in the treasury doesn't mean it will be spent. But I think there is an argument that burning some could give confidence to investors, to token holders, that they won't be diluted in the future.
The idea is to trust no one, right? Like if you have the DXG there, they have to trust that they're done, that the DXG won't spend them. But once you burn it, that's it. You cannot mint anymore. So the idea is to create this confidence where they don't have to trust us. We just burn it. That's it. If we are not going to use it, so why do we need it? It's the same as have it or not.
And then I think Dave is saying this in the chat, but I think another line of thinking would be that if this is from the buyback reserve, had that been, DXD gone into the bonding curve, it would have been burnt. So kind of like just sort of a consistency with the original design of the token supply is another line of thinking, I think.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I'm just reading a comment from Nathan earlier. It says, Connor was talking about in regards to this one. Connor, of course, has been an active DXD holder, has participated in a lot of these conversations in Discord and also on the forum. So he was kind of saying, well, we could take an average price for all of these, and then that would potentially move the number that would be burnt up and potentially the number that would be accessible to general treasury down. I don't know if others have thoughts on that. I think simplicity is kind of easier here. And yeah. Nathan, did you have anything to add?
I wouldn't be in particular for or against any scenario. So yeah, it's just, I don't know. It's a bit too focused, too focused, and and if we are running proper finances, the books, we should honor the numbers and not always lean on favoring. It's just numbers are numbers. It's the proposition is a bit weird. It's clearly intended to favor someone. Is just,
well, I think if you look at the progression of the proposals, right, that first million was not specified to be from the buyback reserve. So if anything, that is from the treasury. And if you take that, I think it just makes sense to take that first million and not do an average, because I just don't see any I just don't see why an average would be the interpretation, since there was an independent proposal ahead of the other ones, right? So
yeah, I think you can say we're trying to clarify something. How can we clarify something? But then when we go back and look at what we have to point to, there's actually a pretty clear delineation here there. And so I feel if we didn't have that clear delineation, where it was, a little bit more confusion, then maybe it would make sense. But yeah, I think because we can point to things, and this is, I think, the benefit of, how you reference proposals and discussions, months and maybe even a year later, and how that can have an effect. But yeah, to me, that's the clarification. And then once we make that clarification, we reach consensus on that, then we can kind of get the price and the burn numbers pretty easily. Cool. And then, yeah, the second item that is, I think, important, as we're going through this one now, is support from the general treasury. So with that clarification, with that adjustment, so there would be around 550 ETH left in the buyback reserve that could continue to purchase DXD along the same conditions as all the other buyback extensions. Who knows what the price of ETH would be, but this would be around maybe 2 million, a little less, depending on the price of ETH, $2 million in additional purchases. That typically would probably take 8 to 10 weeks, 8 to 11 weeks to run through. So just thinking ahead, after the ETH and the WETH and the GP relayer depletes over the next couple of weeks, and then after the 550 ETH would deplete from the buyback reserve, what then for kind of supporting the price of DXD or driving value to DXD, right, through tokens or through revenue? I think just kind of starting a little bit about that discussion. And I still think it makes sense to support DXD from the general treasury, but I think it should be in a different manner than what comes from the buyback reserve, because that is again, a sharp delineation between we're treated kind of, those are being treated differently there. And I think there is a very large concern about continuing to purchase DXD as it approaches 100% of NAV. It makes a lot of sense to purchase DXD when it was at 0.09 or 0.1 ETH, but I think the argument becomes a little bit harder to swallow once you approach NAV itself. So I think it would make sense to have some general agreement on continued support from the general treasury for DXD after the buyback reserve be depleted, but at something lower than the NAV for that has been dictated for the previous buyback proposals there. So here I was recommending that the general treasury, after the buyback reserve would be depleted, would potentially continue to buy DXD as long as it's 70% of the treasury's value here. And again, this would take place presumably after the buyback reserve would be depleted there. And I don't actually have the current value, but I think we're probably at like a little over 50% of NAV right now. So yeah, any thoughts on this, on number 2 here, on support from the general treasury?
Once again, I'm not clearly for or against anything. I just wonder if anyone had thought about this. If we keep doing the buyback, are we kind of like pegging DXD to the price of Ether? Because this has to be like a free market dynamic that about how investors value a company, and anyone should be able to freely buy and sell a token. And in the tokenomics of DXD, there's no claim on the treasury, and what is in the tokenomics is the buyback reserve, and as intended, it's been used, and we keep using it for its intended purpose. But outside of the buyback reserve, we kind of like meddling with the price dynamic. And if we say it doesn't even have to be 100%, even 70%, it's like a kind of like a peg to me. I don't know.
I think I have somewhat similar thoughts. The way I would frame it is, the general treasury was raised to build products, right? That as the intention, and to like redistribute the assets that were raised to build products. Starts to look. I mean, it depends how you do it, how aggressively, to what extent, etc. But it starts to look like a liquidation, and I don't, I think you could, in theory, imagine maybe a scenario where a liquidation would be something that governance would want to do. I think we're very, very far from that, right? And the overall intention of the treasury is to support product development and to have a good runway to execute on the roadmap of the DAO.
Other thoughts, comments?
So I guess I'd like to follow up on that, right? So I don't see any problem per se with like, okay, the treasury should be making some acquisition of DXD below 70% NAV, given, I think that could make sense, but I guess I would want to have a better understanding, like, how much at what rate. And I think the other thing to balance it with would be like, how healthy is the runway for product development, right? Like, so I think I would be in support of it to some extent if the runway looked, well supported, basically.
Yeah, and I think this is like how we kind of start to flow from like 1 to 5 here, where like the 1 we kind of, okay, we got some agreement there, and then like once we start going down like 2 and like, okay, if we're going to do general support and general treasury, then like what does that mean for runway? What does that mean for I think NAV is like an important thing, and then like this kind of all does kind of go back with governance 2.0 and how like what is the long-term reason to hold DXD. And I do think like the tokenomics that we were relying on to start with in terms of the buyback reserve, like once that's depleted, it's not clear that there's a, with the launch of like Swapper token and how we have revenue for the products, like it's not clear how that translates to DXD right now. And so I think part of this is almost providing like a stopgap measure until we can come up with like a solution that does incorporate like all of these things. And so then the question is like, do we need to include this kind of discussion now, or maybe we should have more things kind of figured out? But I think part of it is just giving some level of confidence that after the buyback reserve would end, that there would be kind of something there. And so figuring out maybe what that is for moving forward.
It's like we want to send a couple of strong signals, right? Like 1, we want to send a signal that DXDAO is building, and we're like more than prepared to do so through different market conditions. And like, I think in theory we should be trading way above NAV because we actually have some interesting products and like a very interesting organization. So like, I think that's something that I hope we will eventually realize. Obviously, this bearish market trend and crypto in general, it makes that somewhat difficult, but I think that's like the challenge that we have as contributors. And then like on the flip side of that is like, sending a signal that like DXDAO cares about the DXD price. And like, if it's way undervalued, then like DXDAO is maybe willing to use its treasury to support that as well. But I think, there's some things to figure out. So like on the runway side, I think we should maybe construct a notion or like an amount that we would need to have like a safe runway, right? Like, and maybe that would represent a portion of the treasury that like would never be touched, right? Like this is like escrow.
It's not part of the calculation for NAV. It's like another way of.
Well, maybe you could include it in the NAV, but it would not be an amount that would ever like we'd ever like sell, right? Like go a bit below or something as part of buybacks, maybe, right? Or you could separate it from NAV completely. But I think the important thing would be that we have this confidence that like, this 4 years of runway or whatever, like, I think we got to put numbers on this, right? Like, we got to account for potential market volatility or bear market or, different market conditions, right? But I think having a sense of what our, like burn rate is, and then a sense of like how much runway we think is like a healthy amount to basically have in reserve to kind of guarantee that we can keep building under different conditions. I think like, it should be a reasonable amount and then anything kind of beyond that is where you say like, okay, like this is beyond really the scope of what is even needed or can even be utilized by the DAO. And then that amount could be like something that could be drawn down upon to like support DXD price under certain conditions as well.
Augusto, is your hand?
It is, yes. My question is, when and where do we start thinking about revenue? I mean, that's, for example, John is talking about we want to have enough DXD and Ether to support a runway of 4 years where we are going to be building products. But what about revenue? I mean, of course, we want to have revenue in that 4 years, right? So how much are we going to target on revenue? How much do we need to get back from our investment on building products? Another question, only building or investing in products too? For example, let's think about the hackathon. If the hackathon happens and we found out 1, 2, 3 projects that we want to support them economically, and maybe bring them into the DXgov family, or support them outside the DXgov family and be involved as investors. Is that something that we might be interested? And if so, where does the revenue come in? Because this is something super important, and I think we have been avoiding this question for some time. How much revenue did the products that we built generated so far?
I'd agree. We probably do need more of a focus on that. There is fees coming in from Swapper, and it kind of, the trading volumes have varied, but like, say, for example, there was on average $500,000 of trading volume per day. That translates to something like almost $50,000 per year in protocol fees for Swapper, and then DXDAO has like a portion of the Swapper tokens, right, to derive those fees from. So there is a fee collection happening, and I think this is something that we have talked about as well for other products, like including Omen when there was some volume there, and we've talked about it with Carrot as well, right? So I do think it is something that we have thought about and are concerned with, but it might be nice to make the I think, obviously, you've talked a little bit before about having like a dashboard maybe on DXVote where you can see the amount of fees coming in, kind of like what the current state is. Like, it might be good to highlight this, right, to bring it into focus.
I mean, yes, don't get me wrong. This is awesome. Have you guys heard of any DAO who is already generating revenue or on anything, right? So we are generating revenue from Swapper on fees that we charge them and we take them on chain. So all that revenue is generated completely on the decentralized way, and it never leaves the blockchain. We don't use any central entity or bank or whatever, right? Nothing centralized. So I think we might be the first DAO who is doing it, which is already a huge achievement, right? But how do we improve it, right? So
yeah, I think it
right
varies.
now
yeah. Oh, just on the point of like other DAOs and stuff, I think this is something that varies widely across crypto projects. Some, many of which like basically have no like generation of fees, but some actually do have quite good generation of fees. I think what comes to mind are like YEarn, like Sushi Swap, MakerDAO. Like, these are all projects that are like generating, and it's actually like going back to the token already. And then there's other projects that like have a lot of potential and maybe just aren't collecting it yet. Like, I think Uniswap, right, like, it hasn't turned on fees in V2, but like there's huge potential there for revenue. So yeah, I don't think we're definitely not the first crypto organization. I would argue that DXDAO is much more of a DAO than those other projects, but certainly there's ones that have pretty good generation of fees and revenue. And we're competing with them, right? So we want to try to catch up on some of this.
Yeah, and also you talk only about building products, where I think investing in products is also a very good tool and something that we can do fairly easy. And of course, we need, if you find an spot or a nice idea and they say you their bank account, that's it. We cannot do it, right? But
yeah, and this is maybe jumping ahead on like Chris's points, right? Because he kind of gets at this later in the post. But I mean, there are other, DXDAO has made investments, right? And so I guess that's another question, like, right, like if $100,000 investment from DX Ventures eventually becomes liquid and has some kind of return, like, what does that mean for NAV? What does that mean for DXD holders? In addition, like, there's yield getting generated from the staked ETH that Dave has already kind of like, led the effort around and Chris to like get going, right? There's already some yield there. Like, how does that get accounted for? I think there's some proposals coming. Chris and Dave could talk more about this, right? I think they're deeper into this, but I understand that there's more proposals coming on how to generate yield with the treasury, right? So like these are more ways that DXDAO is making money with its treasury, and then to what extent is that being, like how does that get used and where does that go?
Big questions. Augusto looked like you were going to answer.
Yeah, no, more of the same. I think it will be also very good to start taking account of that revenue that we gather and see how we can invest it. I think it's a very good use case, and how do we say it? It will look very good as, okay, this is money that we just earned, right, by investing and building on DeFi products. So, and we are reinvesting it to generate more money. So,
Yeah,
I think there is a very good PR there that maybe we are not taking advantage of.
I'm also a very big fan of doing buybacks with funds the treasury yields on, right? Like the yields of the treasury. But I think that's still very far out until there is any significant amount or like something that's, makes really a difference at this point in time.
Yeah, it's almost like think yield, fees, and like project tokens, right? Whether they're from DX Ventures or something else, like those are kind of the things that need to somehow be translated into buying back DXD or something. To take a meta step back, it's April 27th, 2022. Maybe a DX historian can correct me, but I think we're May 9th, 2020, I think was around the launch of the DXD token and the bonding curve. And then I think May 13th, 2021, so just like 1 year later, we DXDAO passed the DXD buyback program. And so like, I don't know, here we are another year later. And I think those were each huge steps forward for DXDAO, and have kind of, there's lots of different things that have come off of that. Really the governance 2.0, like kind of group came off of that initial launch of DXD. And so I think there's a lot of things kind of going from that. And so I think we are at another one of those like inflection points, like a year later, that we can kind of think about next steps and what we could be building for the next year here. So yeah, I guess just in terms of next steps or things here, I think there's pretty clear consensus on point one. I think point two will need some kind of a little bit more discussion and consensus on like what exactly we're trying to do with this, which is like convey like a long-term signal to the market, I think in a lot of ways. And then like the big thing, is like these things that we're talking about revenue, about how it kind of yield, how these things will eventually kind of translate to DXD. I think those are going to require a lot of work and effort, and like putting some of this information together, figuring out where the best opportunities are, and then kind of probably designing a new system that may end up looking like like maybe a new token model in a lot of ways. So I think that we have a lot of work ahead of us on these like 3, 4, and 5, but they don't need to be decided now. But I think we need to put like a concerted effort to explore to research and explore these going forward. So I don't know what that looks like. Maybe it's like a working group or something else. But I think we have an opportunity to do some things here with the DXD token, as it comes up on its 2-year anniversary. So this is the 721 days. So May 6th. Because I think there's a separate argument, or you could also look at when the proposal passed, the ENS proposal passed to redirect DXTrust.eth to the bonding curve one.
Yeah, I think that was that May 9th, or that was later than the.
There's a John tweet thread that I remember here.
Yeah.
Like very early on.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, it was an interesting question too at the time, like whether people would start buying from the curve before the ENS proposal like passed, because until that proposal passed, there really wasn't like a clear sanctioning from DXDAO. Although, I mean, the money was going to DXDAO, so I mean, yeah, I don't know. I think the way it turned out, if I remember correctly, is people did buy before the proposal passed. It like I got some amount of ETH.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of this similar thing when we have like a new swapper update or something. Like you could go check out the IPFS, hash, and you're kind of betting that governance will pass it. But anyway, I'm looking 2020 blockchain stuff. It's amazing. It'll just like always be there. Yeah, and just also in the forum, just to highlight a couple other points. So as I said, Connor, I talked about his point here. He was also talking about maybe the NFE factor and some of those things. Sky, I think, is making a good point here, which is that, like kind of the implementation of governance 2.0 is critical to the situation. I think that's kind of like the political structure that allows this to be very cohesive. And then Spreek showing up in the forum after 10 months with a killer post here. Yeah, a couple different points there. So yeah, make sure and any other thoughts or questions will come through there. And yeah, hopefully in the next week or so, we have something specific that we can include in a buyback extension proposal. Yeah, and then we can move forward.
How many of these points were you looking to address before the buyback extension proposal? Was that just 1 and 2, or is it just kind of 1?
I think 1 and 2. So definitely 1. I think 1 and 2, but I think like with 2, it's really about the signal. So I'm kind of trying to think of like what should be included in that signal. Like I guess it would be 70. And we probably have to agree on a number, but then like that would still be like almost 3 months away. So we could put things in there that would be like, okay, these things need to happen before that. But I like the idea of incorporating that signal with this. But number 1, I think, is the one that has to happen.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I love seeing Spreek in there. It was like, and it has that like little post that says, "It's been a while since we've seen Spreek."
Yeah, Spreek touches on a couple of his points. Kind of touch on the aspect of like the runway, which I thought was really good too. And that's probably, I'll make a comment probably around that as well.
Awesome. Any other thoughts, comments, concerns for today? Small Chris. So it was Big Chris the whole time. I'm really curious to see what the recording is going to be.
Big Chris left me some time ago, unfortunately.
It's always here in your heart. Cool. Well, yeah, I guess that's it. Any other thoughts, comments before we close? Awesome. Well, thanks everyone. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Adios.
Cheers.
Adios.